Hi everyone. Welcome to my talk. Why everyone who offers an API is actually in developer relations. So we can just dive right in. That's me. I'm Julie. I'm a developer relations engineer at Abound, and have previously worked at Microsoft and Pinterest. Abound is an API-first company that automates withholdings for tax, healthcare, and retirement for independent contractors, freelancers, and self-employed business owners. I'm gonna put this like here. We integrate with banks, payrolls, invoicing software, personal financial management apps, and other companies that pay or serve independent workers. But when it comes down to it, we're an API for taxes. So it's really like a sexy topic that's gonna be really exciting. But now that I've introduced myself, I want to discuss what we're going to be talking about today. This talk, it's going to go over what developer relations is, what it means in terms of an API as a product, and the developers you serve, how to succeed with different types of developers, examples from my company that I've worked on, and many, many dog GIFs. So you might be asking yourself now, Julie, that title is really bold. You know, how do you know that I'm in developer relations? We're gonna do a quick little quiz. Hold on. So here's our little quiz here. So your first question is your primary target audience is developers, right? I'm gonna guess most of you said yes if you came to FinTech DevCon, that you work with developers in some sort. Your next one, your strategy and tactics are designed to change developer behavior, right? What considers a goal for you? You want developers to do something. That's your main goal. So that's probably also a success. And then finally, your success depends on developers developing, okay? If all three of those are true, congratulations, you are now in developer relations. That is all it takes. And so now you may be going, okay, I'm in this. What is this? A man on Tinder described my job. This is a real screenshot. He described my job as being a therapist for developers. And it's accurate, but it hurts. So, I mean, he also can't spell. So I did not go on a date with him, but I did quote this. And then in actuality, this is my favorite quote about developer relations. To the community, I represent the company. To the company, I represent the community. I must have both of their interests in mind at all times. I think that kind of really sums up developer relations, or you can just say I'm a therapist. So let's break down what that quote really means. Here's a great little infographic of like where DevRel falls. So a lot of the times it falls under product or engineering. Some people believe it falls under marketing. It kind of can, and so as you can see, between product, DevRel is in the middle, right? We help with APIs, SDKs, and then we're also the person who directly talks to your customers, your developers, right? We share information, we share those resources, and then they bring back that feedback to DevRel, right? Engineers don't want to hear from customers, but DevRel does, because DevRel will then synthesize that information and then make something from it that is actionable. So, in between, both people, very important. With DevRel, how we view it at Abound is we use a concept called the 11-star experience, because DevRel encompasses many topics and has three main goals: awareness of products, enabling developer success, and creating a community to gather feedback. It's really hard to measure that, so you have to get creative. Right? With Abound, what we do is we have the idea of the 11-star experience. The 11-star experience was created by Chesky at Airbnb, Brian Chesky, and it's basically asking for one puppy and getting a pile of puppies, right? It's everything you wanted and more, right? It's the perfect experience that you want, and at Abound, that's how we view DevRel. We want a developer to go, not just, that was great, but that was like really good. Like unbelievably good. Like I didn't think that that's what I wanted, and that's what I wanted. So that's the level that we try and serve at DevRel, or at Abound. Also, to include into DevRel, some fields you may have heard of, and you're like, is this DevRel? You may have heard of DX, developer marketing, developer success, community, developer education, all of those different things, partner engineering, solutions engineering, sales engineering, all of those fall under DevRel. There's not one size fits all for DevRel, and that's also very important to keep in mind. DevRel is enabling a developer to be successful with your product while aligning with your company goals. So we're gonna go over, this did not move, hold on. So in order to create this successful thing, we use 3 different personas. And these are our 3 types of developers that we're gonna talk about today. And we're gonna discuss how we solve problems for them and see an example of how Abound solves for them. So our 3 types are the reader. The reader is the developer who will read everything you've ever written and will quote something that you didn't even know existed. You have the explorer. Most developers, I think, believe they are an explorer. They're the ones who will, take your code and just run. They don't want to talk to you. They just want to explore and try. And finally, you have the seeker. That's the person who's going to ask you a question every step of the way. So we're going to break down each one of these, how to solve for them, how to recognize them, etc. So we're going to start with the reader. The reader, I personally like because they find minutia, but they can also sometimes be difficult to work with because they want things done their way. Hold on, my slides don't move. Okay, so first question they often ask, where do I find this? Where do I find blah, 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 right? Making documents searchable and sorted by common use cases helps readers find the information they're looking for. How do I do whatever? How do I do taxes? I don't know. Think of your company and where this falls. Keep track of those repeat questions that you get and use a quick call. Sometimes that's the most powerful thing with readers is they don't know what they're looking for yet. And they just need to explain to you it, and then you'll be like, yes, your product that you are looking for is this one area. And finally, do you know the answer to this super niche concept? This is one of their favorite things to do because they go through your documentation. They're gonna find the little niche and obscure points in it. Admit when you don't know something. That's a really hard thing to do in DevRel, but you have to do it, especially when it's regulated. And because we all work in finance, that's a very, very slippery slope. Why I love the reader and why you should love them too. They find minutia and small bugs. They find your outdated documentation. They find where you have fields that maybe aren't good. They really up-level you in a different way. But however, if you don't match their expected flow of where to find information, they get frustrated with you. So being able to balance those 2 concepts is really important. At Abound, this is my coworker, John. He's our tax PM. I forced him to take this photo for this. You can tell he was really happy to do it. And those are our favorite books by Nolo. We do think that we deserve a sponsorship by Nolo because we recommend them so often. But so one of the things we do is we actually do a lot of research and we read a lot about taxes, even though it's not exciting. We also work closely with tax experts when we don't know the answer. We also know when to go to an expert versus when to answer a question. So questions that I will answer are, how do I deduct this business meal using your API? That question, I'll answer that. But if questions people come to me with are, I have a dinner and 3 people are business and 3 people are not, how can I deduct that? Or is that deductible? I might know the answer, but I'm not gonna give them the answer because that's not my job. My job is to help them with the product that we make. So being able to separate those 2 things is really important. The other thing we do on the side here, this is our documentation. You can see things are easily sortable and follow a specific pattern. Each area has an overview and they have a getting started or prerequisite. By creating this common formatting, you can then help developers find what they're looking for faster. Also within our tool, we monitor what people search. If we start to see an increase of searches of a certain term, we try and bring that out more because that usually means it's hard to find. So those are all how we kind of do it at Abound. So yeah, that's John. The next person we're going to go over is the Explorer. So the Explorer, again, I think most developers kind of will be like, I'm an Explorer. And I think that's kind of true. So their thing is they like to ask, why does this work like this? Because they're not going to read. You need to have detailed descriptions throughout documentation and guides. You need to have it in multiple places. Because again, explorers aren't going to look. They just want it in front of them. And they're not going to go, oh, a guide about this. They like want to hit your API reference and never talk to you again. Next one, how do I do that really complex thing? Shared links and guides. Again, they're not always the first ones to read, but you can teach them to fish and teach them to use your guides. They are written for them, and by just handing them to them, maybe the next time they have one of those questions, they'll take a pause and go, oh, there's a guide for that. Oh, I know that they probably already wrote that, right? Like you can change an explorer to be more of a reader just by priming them. And then finally, why is this happening? I get that question so many times. Put important information for behavior multiple places in the documentation, especially things that are breaking changes or things that maybe aren't expected. So if you have fields that are maybe required for a future step, describe that. Expect that they're not going to know that because they're not going to go to your guides. They're just going to hit your API, go to your like one API reference, look at that, and ignore the rest of it. The Explorer is really good because they will break your code so fast. They will ruin your life. But that is what also makes them really great, right? It's kind of a balance. The other problem is because of how fast Explorers work, they want their bugs fixed first. They think they are very important, which they are. They're developers, but I can't fix every bug immediately. So being able to set precedent and explain to them that maybe something works the way it does for a reason instead of it's not broken is a really good, important level to set. Also, again, they really don't read, which is it's a thing. So again, explorers don't read. Taxes are already pretty boring, and they're also very intimidating. So making sure important common traps are visible is how we do this at Abound. Often at Abound, we talk about the 3-30-3 method, which is 3 seconds to know what Abound is, 30 seconds to know how to build with Abound, and 3 minutes to make an API call. So we try to reduce that time as much as possible by making things possible, like by making explorers have an easier time. So when you create an account with Abound, there's a nice big purple button that says try it. And when you click that button, you get directed right to our documentation, and you can hit the try it button. See if it's gonna go, and it runs. Right, that lowers this perceived cost of implementation immediately. A developer goes, oh, I can just press a button and it works. And you can see also here, we have common traps right there. So those explorers who want to get started, they can just read it and go, oh, great, here's the few things. Now I know how to make an API call. Now I can go through, maybe I want to, create a payer now, right? I can go here. I can do like an example. I can just like go crazy. Do whatever I want, right? Like request example, right? And then we can just populate this in. I have to change one little label. If it's gonna let me, it won't. It's fine. But you can see like I can run something else in another place and get an example and see that it failed, and then I can look into it. So it's a really powerful tool, right? Using your documentation to your benefit is really helpful to help explorers move along faster. Next up, the Seeker. The Seeker, another person in DevRel called them the question vampire because they'll suck you dry with questions. And I think that's a little aggressive, but it's funny, but it's aggressive. So when we look at the question vampire, they often ask, how do I do? Why do I do? What is this? Why is this? So we'll start going through them. I like to think of more of the seeker as curious, like a toddler, and that they'll keep asking you why, and it's very endearing, but it also can be very frustrating. So it's like again, all of these people have pluses and minuses. So how do I do X? Figure out the core issue they're trying to solve for. A lot of the times people will ask you, how do I do this tax deduction? Well, why do they want to do that tax deduction? What is the reasoning behind why they're trying to do this thing? If you can get to that first, then you might be able to answer their question faster and get them through the flows faster. You may already know the answer, you just don't know what they're really asking for. They also still like to ask, how do I do? So having sample and examples of common use cases that you see through your customers is really important, right? You know who your main customers are. Create sample code and examples around those, because those are going to be the most common ones. And then finally, did something change? I have been asked this as well. Change logs are really important when you have an API. People don't know something changed unless you tell them. And having that as regular communication is also very important. Having that communication not just in your Slack, have an email, have multiple places where that information can be found, because the seeker will ask every time. The seeker is really helpful because they help you understand the entire customer journey, because they will ask you questions each step of the way, whether you want them to or not. And that's really helpful for creating a close relationship with product teams, right? You understand the journey, and you can document that and then improve upon it for that 333 use case. It helps you limit that faster because you know what steps people will take. So here's how we at Abound solve it. We use a software called README, which is a documentation tool, and they have this cool feature called recipes, where you can kind of write sample code. And one of the things that we do at Abound is all of our sample code is tested. So all of our sample code is tested, and it runs every time our code is rebuilt in our repo. And I just set up a quick little IDE beforehand and literally copied and pasted that recipe in right here. And you can see it prints out exactly the same as in this sample here. I get the exact same response, and it works the first time, right? It's a usable use case, and there's no issues with it, right? It will always work. It will never fail because we check it before we even push code. Like, code will not go live if these fail, which helps us keep them always working. Another really important thing around the seeker is knowing when to say no. In DevRel, you end up caring a lot because you care for your customers and you want them to succeed. But calling them the question vampire is accurate because they will suck you dry if you don't set boundaries. Knowing that, setting SLAs, setting like, I'm not gonna answer your question at 10 p.m. at night, you can wait the next day, you can wait 2 days, like it's gonna be okay. Setting those boundaries is really important with a seeker. If that doesn't work, you can always be a little bit more direct. Please don't do this. I just sometimes think about doing this. I've always wanted to do it, but I haven't. But maybe one day, when someone really pushes me over, I'll just send them, because I get asked when our taxes due a little bit too often. So now we're gonna wrap that up. Where is it going? We're gonna wrap up everything today. This was a very short one, I know, but they told me I had to be quick because everything's being a little bit more condensed today. Things that we did today. We learned about the 3 common developer types, how to recognize them and best develop an experience that allows them to succeed using an 11-star experience. We learned that each one of these developers make your API a better product, but there are also challenges with all of them. And that is totally okay. That's what makes them great. That's what makes humans human. All these developers' final goal is to make something using your software. So if you keep that in mind first, even when they frustrate you, you'll see they're powerful. Finally, we learned there's no such thing as like good documentation. Documentation's living. It's not I made my documentation, it's done, I never need to look at it again. Your documentation, your website, your code will always be evolving. And so you always need to keep in mind these different type of personas while you go. And that's where developer relations comes in handy, because that's my job, right? That's your entire job, is to focus on just making sure these people get the right things, staying on top of those trends, and staying on top of all of those things. All of these things are part of that developer experience, and improving them and recognizing it will create the best product for you. And so now I have time for questions, because I feel like people don't know DevRel, so I want to make sure I have lots of time for questions. Does anyone have a question? Yes.
The try-its and the step-by-steps
Yes.
are really nice. What roles have folks created those?
So the recipes, so you asked about who created the try it button and who created the recipe and the sample code. DevRel will write sample code. So I wrote all the sample code, and then the try it button was a mix between us and our dashboard team. So they integrated it in. It uses a JWT token, so it pulls the app ID and app secret, and it puts it right into the documentation. But that try it button in our code is built into README. This is just how their code works. So, right, that's taking advantage of the tools you have.
Sounds like a separate role in a way, instead of the core developers of the platform. They're not the ones that created this.
No. Yeah, this is all developer relations, right? Like, this is your dashboard team, right, connecting to your documentation. So that is a separate team than the people who code our API. But again, it depends on the size of your company too. You might just have 3 developers. Yes?
Yeah, maybe kind of segue into that. I'm curious, did developer relations exist when you joined Abound? Or is it something that's built up, like how do you build the core API developers and the core team?
Yeah.
Build their investment, and this is something we need to spend time on, you know?
Yeah, so I'm just repeating, because I have a microphone, about how did Abound have developer relations before I was there? Was it already kind of involved? Where was it with the core product? I was the first developer relations hire. You don't need one when you start a company, but a lot of the times you reach a breaking point of that kind of you need someone to stay on top of everything. And I think recognizing you're in developer relations early is kind of the key, right? Abound at its beginning was a developer relations company because they were an API first company. So their customers are developers. So making sure a developer can use their product, that's those 3 little checks at the front, right? They are DevRel. They just didn't have a DevRel person, right? It's like you can have marketing at a company but not have a marketing person. So I kind of view it like that. Any other questions? I'm going to go with all the way in the back first.
You mentioned getting feedback back to the engineers. What feedback mechanisms have you found to be most effective? Is it writing tickets or regular staff to the engineers?
Yeah, so it depends, right? So if I have a breaking bug, whenever a customer, he asked how does feedback get from me to engineers? When a developer comes to me, a customer comes to me and asks me, hey, Julie, I see this is broken. The first thing I do is I replicate it and make sure that I can also do it, right? Is it actually a problem or is it not, right? Is it the expected behavior? Is it not, right? Go through those first things. And if something's really broken, I then go, is this blocking every customer or is this blocking one customer? Is this going to cause a fire or not? Is this smoke or is this fire, right? You kind of have to think about all those different things first. If it's fire, I go very quickly to the developer and I go, something is broken, we need to fix it right now. Most of the time, I have regular meetings with the product team, daily, and we go over everything customers have said, and we kind of use our roadmap as our way to know what is important, right? We can't just say every customer is the most important. You can't do that. That will tire you out. Instead, we look for common themes that relate to where we want to go as a product. You had a question up closer.
I was basically going to ask the same thing, actually, just about your interaction with the product team.
Yeah.
What that looks like in terms of, I feel something I'm struggling with is just having a bunch of small one-off requests and how to turn those into
Yeah.
And
Yeah, so how do you turn one-off requests into features? Look for patterns, right? Like, you end up finding that, like, I find that sometimes the best customers are the smaller customers because they give you a lot of information and they give you all of the things, and then you can choose which ones you can apply to more people, right? Which of those small features that you, like, one-off things, like, I really wish this field existed, right? Can you think of another use case where that is used? Can you think of 3 use cases where that can be used? If you can think of more than one use case, do it. Also, why I like that I came from engineering is I don't just advocate for external engineers, I advocate for internal engineers. I'm not going to push a project that's going to take engineers 10 days if I know they don't have 10 days. But if I know something's going to take them 4 seconds to, like, add a field that already exists, we just need to make it public, I'm going to be like, hey, when you're getting coffee, can you add this one field for me? And they'll be like, sure, right? It looks great for them. They get another ticket done, right? And it helps the product move forward. So that's kind of how I balance it, right? Like, think about the engineering cost of it, because those little tiny bits can sometimes add up. Yes?
If I wanted to hire a DevRel person, what would you say is the ideal candidate for that?
If you wanted to hire a DevRel person, who's the ideal candidate? Well, DevRel kind of falls into 2 key areas. Well, the first time I started doing DevRel, someone described DevRel as an engineer that can talk to people and who, like, can, like, bear with people. And I guess that's one way. The other way you can go is you go the marketing side and you find a marketing type of personality who understands tech, right? So if you're looking for more what's called evangelism, which is like, check out my fancy product, let me do a demo for you, that's evangelism. And then you kind of have, like, DevRel advocacy, DevRel engineer. That's more of someone who is an engineer who really cares about the customer. That's kind of what you're looking for. You're looking for an engineer who doesn't mind sitting in product meetings, who doesn't mind those things that most engineers despise. So it's a hard role to fill, but there's definitely a lot of them out there. And I think also very important is DevRel, I had, like, a little slide, was created in the 80s actually, but it's only really gained popularity since Twilio became a thing, because Twilio was the first API first company. Like, officially they were first. And so, like, this idea is maybe 10, 15 years old, right? So, and there's people who want to get involved who haven't done DevRel. And I personally am a person who believes in taking a chance on someone if they really want something. So if someone's like, I want to do DevRel, and they don't have the experience, but they're a very strong engineer, they're probably good for DevRel because they understand the engineering topics and can speak with developers, right? The strategy and the business part is what comes with learning and experience. Yes?
Do you use similar resources for internal engineers as well, or do you have 2 separate DevRel?
Do I use different resources for internal and external? My company is 12 people. So there really is no internal, like, when I advocate for developers internally, it's when I'm meeting with the product team and I'm sharing ideas. It's more of, like, that's more of my own head, is that tool of, like, me saying, like, we should build this versus we shouldn't build this versus we should put this on the roadmap for in 6 months, right? That comes down to some of that strategy work that you develop over time, right? And recognizing what's a small ask and what's a big ask.
One of the things I struggle with in DevRel is developers in the community making really great product feature requests, and I know they're heavy lifts, and know they probably won't be done in the short term. What are your thoughts on how much your roadmap you share with your developers? Do you get any kind of insight there? Also knowing that a startup can pivot at any second and maybe say they're going to do something next quarter, but then product decides to scrap it, and, you know, nothing ever happens.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of my job is empathy, which is why, like, the therapist works really well, because, like, I feel like a lot of my stuff is, like, I get why a developer would be upset if I had a product and then I was like, actually, I'm not doing that anymore. Like, that's really annoying. Like, I think everyone can agree that's, like, super frustrating. And so, like, how I do DevRel is I try to level with developers. Like, I will be honest. I will be like, I know this sucks. I know this is difficult. I know like you want this, but like if you are one person and you want this, it's really hard to justify it. And they kind of get that, right? If there's a really great product idea and you can show product, like how it can apply, like I always believe come with numbers, come with data points, come with information of like, why will this have impact, right? If you can show that it has enough impact, it will get moved ahead, right? Like, but that's really hard to prove when you have a small customer base. I also like to use other companies as examples a lot of the times when someone asks for something. So I'll go, well, you know, this competitor, this company does it this way. Very good example, we have webhooks at Abound, and we didn't have signatures on them. And a bunch of people started asking for that, and they were like, oh, I don't know, we don't have time to do that. And I was like, okay, here's every other company that has signatures. And I just sent like a list of 30 companies. I was like, these are all the other softwares these customers use, so it's standard, so we should add it, right? Like being able to like bring the proof, I think is a very strong way to move products forward. Yes?
I'm coming at this a little more from like the content perspective.
Yeah.
It seems like documentation is its own form of like content and how you do outreach to developers. Are there other, I mean, is it like blogging?
Yeah.
Types of information, you know, ways of sort of getting your message out to people.
Yeah, so
who like to use it?
yeah, so he was asking about types of content that developer relations can use to kind of get your information out. The problem with fintech is a lot of your customers are going to be competitors. And so that makes it really hard to form a community because none of them want to talk to each other. So like creating that, like throw it out the window, it's never gonna happen. But like Moov has this, they have open source code, which is really powerful. If you can open source something, do that. If you can contribute to open source, contribute to open source. Become a knowledge expert. You want people like, why does John have like 5 NOLO books and I have 2? It's because I want someone to ask me those questions I can't answer. I want someone to look at me and go, and I want someone to think when they have a question and go, you know, Abound will know the answer to that tax question. I don't want them to go, Abound won't answer me. I want them to first say, Abound will answer me. I might not answer them. I might tell them to go talk to someone. The original title for this talk was, I'm not a tax advisor, but, because that's like the most common thing I say. I'm not a tax professional, but, because I have to say that because legally I can't give you tax advice. But I know enough to be able to say a little bit, right? So I think that's a really strong way. I think blogs are really great. It also depends on your community, right? Like, do you have people who want to read blogs? Do you have people who, like, are the companies that you're competing with, do they do regular blogs? Do they do Twitch streams? That's like a thing now. It's really hard to do that sort of stuff and like make it stick and be strong if you're not huge. Like Twilio does it, Microsoft, like these big behemoths do it, right? Because they have enough resources to send someone to stream on Twitch all day. I personally,
Is it like a Twitch coding session?
yeah, that's a thing. Twitch coding sessions are a thing. People sit on and they like go look up, I'll even give the shout out, Analytical. It's a drag queen, she's great. She does coding sessions and she works at Google. But she does coding sessions on Twitch in full drag, like once a week, right? And so like, that is a way to go. But again, that's Google, right? Like that's like a whole different behemoth size that you're dealing with. Start small, start with small conferences. I'm here, right? Make the connections and figure out what people need first. Yes?
When you are starting small and just building out DevRel, how do you kind of set some boundaries and not burn out your DevRel team by saying, okay, now you're customer support and your technical writers and you're having to do all this other stuff at the same time?
So yeah, so how do you not burn out when you're the first person in DevRel? That's a great question as someone who's the first person in DevRel. I think I'm very lucky to have a product team that if I am on late, they will message me and tell me to get the heck off of my phone. And they will really like push it. And I think also choosing one area of focus to start. I personally believe documentation is king because you hit the seeker and the reader or you hit the reader and the explorer first, which are most people, and the seeker will always just exist. You can never get rid of them. Someone's gonna be like, I'm that person, and be really upset. No, I love those people. So I always say start with documentation. Documentation is king, queen, whatever. That's first. Once you can walk the walk and talk the talk, then you can start going, how do I deal with, login? How do I deal with getting these people to 333? How can I do these other things that will also help speed them up? Because if your documentation isn't good, no one's gonna use your product, right? Like, I feel like with Abound, I've had many customers go like, I don't know what you do, but your documentation is great. I'm like, cool. Like, that's like the best compliment, right? Like, if someone comes to me and they're like, I love your documentation, that's why I decided to work with you, like, that's the win, right? Like, someone will deal with the friction of like creating an account and dealing with the sales team if your documentation is good enough, because you make the rest of it easy. Any other questions? Questions? No? Okay, so here's some of my references. I also want to thank Moov and the conference exhibitors and sponsors. Very important. Hashtag NOLO. Go buy a NOLO book. They're great. They're not giving me any money for saying that, sadly. And then I had a little fun quiz at the end also, because I thought this would be fun. I already kind of gave you the answer to this, but we'll just play it anyway. So it's 2 truths and a lie, right? First API, first company, Twilio. Developer relations community is referred to as avocados. The first developer relations program was created in the 1990s. So our fun little lie was created in the 90s. It was created actually in the 80s by Apple. It was called Software Evangelist. So you can kind of see how it's evolved over time. It's very interesting also, I think, that Apple was the first people to do DevRel, because they really aren't kind to developers anymore. And so yeah, so this is where we end it. This is my be free. Enjoy the rest of the conference. Go be like a wiener dog dressed as a hot dog. Have a lot of fun today. Enjoy yourself, and thank you very much.